Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning for NRCM's annual Citizen Action Day for Maine's environment. This is one of my favorite events each year. Typically, if you've attended an NRCM lobby day, you'll know that it's typically in person at our office in Augusta, just across the street from the State House, and we walk over and lobby our lawmakers directly after we learn about our legislative priorities. Of course, we can't do that this year because of the ongoing COVID pandemic. Hopefully we're turning a corner there and we'll all be able to get together in person soon. My name is Todd Martin. I'm the Grassroots Outreach Coordinator here at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. As you know, NRCM is Maine's largest environmental advocacy organization, protecting, restoring, and conserving Maine's environment now and for future generations. Thanks so much to all of our members who have joined us here this morning. We greatly appreciate your generous support of our work here at NRCM. So as I mentioned at the top, this is a Zoom meeting, not a webinar. So there's a couple of key differences just to remind everybody. So as you can see, your video is enabled. You're welcome to stay on video for the full program. You're also welcome to turn it off. And your audio is also enabled. You're all muted right now, and please stay muted unless you have a question for one of our presenters. And we're going to hold questions until after the morning briefing on our legislative bills. So if you can hold your questions until after Nick presents, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. After Q&A, we'll go into 4 breakout rooms based on our top legislative priorities. When you registered for this morning's event, you indicated which bill you want to learn more about. And the breakout rooms are a chance for you to get your questions answered, to learn a little bit more about the bills in greater detail. And we'll spend about 20 minutes in that breakout room. And then we'll come back here to the main room. The breakout room will end automatically. And then we'll hear from Pete Didisheim, our Advocacy Director, about some other legislative issues in Augusta this session, and also some other environmental issues happening outside of the legislative arena. But before I turn it over to our program directors for you to hear about our top priority bills, I want to welcome NRCM's CEO, Lisa Pullman, just to give a quick welcome and hello.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I'm so delighted to see you all. Thank you so much for registering this morning and joining us from your warm and safe living rooms, I hope, or wherever you're Zooming from. And we look forward so much to seeing you in person again sometime soon, I hope. And I just want to take a minute and thank Todd Martin for pulling this Citizen Action Day together year after year after year. He does a great job, and I'm glad he said it was one of his favorite events. It certainly is one of mine. So thank you so much for joining us. We couldn't do what we do without you. Go ahead, Todd.
Great. Thanks very much, Lisa. I think Abin's going to need to switch in to start sharing his screen so we can turn it over to Melanie to talk about the Ecological Reserves Bill. But just to give Abin a second to pull up his screen. Of course, we can't walk over to the State House today and speak directly to our lawmakers. So we're hoping that after today's program, that you'll give your state representative and state senator a phone call and speak to them about the bills that you'll learn about this morning, and ask how they stand on these bills and how they plan to vote. And then after you have that conversation, we have a quick online survey we'd like for you to fill out to let us know how the conversation went. That will help our lobbying efforts so we can pass our legislative priorities this session. So we hope that you'll have a conversation with your lawmaker and then share notes from that conversation with us on a survey, which you'll get in a follow-up email. But in the meantime, I'll turn it over to Melanie Sturm, NRCM's Forest and Wildlife Director, to brief us on LD 736, a bill to expand Maine's ecological reserve system. Go ahead, Melanie.
Thanks, Todd. Abin, you can go on to the next slide. As Todd said, I'm the Forest and Wildlife Director at NRCM. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm actually going to talk about 2 bills, and the first one is LD 736, but I'm just going to provide a brief update. Fortunately, this bill is in really great shape, and it's not one of the bills that we feel like you need to talk to your legislators about, but if you're excited about it, you're welcome to do that. So the Ecological Reserve system is a network of public and private lands here in Maine. And in the map here, you can see in green the ecological reserves, all 19 of them managed by the Bureau of Parks and Lands. There's about 97,000 acres that the Bureau manages as ecological reserve. And Abin, next slide. The purpose of the reserve system, which was established in 2000 by legislation, is to protect a representative example of all the different habitat types found in Maine, which is kind of embodied in this quote from Aldo Leopold. And in addition to saving all the pieces, the ecological reserve system protects wildlife habitat and biodiversity, and these reserves also serve as scientific research sites, outdoor laboratories. Essentially, they're incredibly important for preserving Maine's biodiversity. And the legislation, Abin, you can go on to the next slide. LD 736 would allow the Bureau to add additional reserves and increase the acreage of its ecological reserve system. Again, although other public and private entities own ecological reserves, in current law, the Bureau of Parks and Lands was limited in its ability to continue adding to this important network of public lands. And so what LD 736 would do, if it is passed, is clean up this 22-year-old law to reflect new science, but also increase the size limits on the total acreage the Bureau is permitted to manage, which is very important because they were pretty much bumping up against these acreage caps that are in the law right now. And we know how important conservation lands are, lands that are free from timber harvest. And so it's important that the Bureau have the ability to create more ecological reserves as they see fit and when the funds become available. So the good news is that LD 736 was passed as amended unanimously out of the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee, and it passed initial votes in the House. It's headed to the Senate on March 9th when they're in session. And so it's well positioned to pass because of that unanimous vote. And we do know that the administration is supportive of the bill. So if the governor has the chance to sign the bill, which we expect she will, we think it'll become law. And so that is just a quick update on ecological reserves. And Abin, I thought you could flip through the next 3 slides just to leave folks with a few examples of some of the Bureau's ecological reserves that LD 736 would help protect more of. There's some really special, beautiful landscapes. And moving on to LD 1626, this is the Tribal Sovereignty Bill. I'm actually really glad to have the chance to tell you about this bill. Tribal sovereignty is something that the tribes are seeking, but a whole host of organizations, individuals, and other stakeholders here in Maine are supportive of. 1626 is moving through the legislature. It had a public hearing on Tuesday, February 15th, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. But it needs as much support as it can get right now. This is a big moment for tribes, and there are things you can do to help. Abin, next slide. The legislation, what it would do, in case you aren't already familiar, which I'm sure a lot of you are because this has been getting quite a lot of attention, it would place tribes in Maine on equal footing with other federally recognized tribes in the other 49 states. There are over 570 other federally recognized tribes. Maine's are the only one, or the tribes in Maine are the only ones who do not have sovereignty and the ability to self-govern and the rights to self-determination. And those rights have not been recognized since the Maine Indian Claims Settlement Act and the Maine Implementing Act of 1980. So here you can see the immense amount of public support that this bill 1626 garnered at the public hearing on the 15th. And just to note that 1626 was carried over from last year and it had a public hearing, but from what I understand, it came up pretty quickly. And so they had a continuation of that public hearing this year. The governor's office is the only opposition testimony that was heard. And although there's quite a lot of public support for the bill, it really does still need a boost, which was what we can talk about in the breakout room. Next slide. So as I've said, LD 1626 is about fairness and equality for the Wabanaki tribes, and we really believe now is the time to restore their sovereignty. The EPC, or the Environmental Priorities Coalition, which NRCM is a member of, picked LD 1626 as a priority bill, and the environmental community writ large is part of the movement calling for tribal sovereignty. And you can see many other organizations here that are supportive. Next slide. So why is NRCM working on this? We're an environmental organization. It might seem difficult for some people to understand why we might care about this, but for us, it comes down to values. We feel like it's a moral imperative to be partners with the tribes. NRCM deeply values the work of the Wabanaki Confederation over the past several decades to safeguard Maine's environment and natural resources, and in solidarity with the Wabanaki Alliance, we believe it's important that we be actively involved in efforts to restore tribal sovereignty. Next slide, please. So the quick update on the status of 1626 is that there is a work session this Thursday morning in the Judiciary Committee. And as I've mentioned, there's a long road ahead for LD 1626 to get the 2/3 vote in both the House and Senate that it will need to override the governor's veto, because we do it from the information I'm getting is that the governor will probably veto this bill in favor of a different bill that was negotiated between the administration and tribes, which is why it's so important that you all please contact your lawmakers. And again, we can talk more about what that might look like in the breakout session. But Maine people support tribal sovereignty, and we have to keep reminding our lawmakers that we're counting on them to vote in favor of this bill. And the tribes in Maine are just asking to be treated like the other 570 federally recognized tribes in the nation. That's it. And the tribes do deserve the right to determine their community's future. So I'd be glad to tell you more about this bill later, but for now, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Melanie, and good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and for your continued support of NRCM. It's so nice to see so many familiar names and faces. My name is Sarah Nichols. I'm the Sustainable Maine Director for NRCM, and I'm going to tell you about LD 1639. This is the bill to close the out-of-state waste loophole. I'll tell you quickly, this is prime time for this bill. It should be moving up. It was voted on by the Environment and Natural Resources Committee with a vote of 11-2 and could head up to the Senate for a vote as soon as next week. So please do pay attention and contact your legislators to talk to them about this bill. So just quickly, what the out-of-state waste loophole is. Basically, there's a loophole in our law, in our Maine law, that allows for waste from out of state to come in and get reclassified as in-state waste, disguised as in-state waste, for the express purpose of being able to be disposed of in our state-owned landfill at Juniper Ridge. So this bill would prevent that from happening into the future, and it also strips away the special treatment for the main culprit. There's one facility that this waste is getting funneled through, and we provide them right now with a lower environmental standard than every other facility in the state. So the bill really closes two loopholes, I think. So you can go to the next slide, please, Abin. So just digging in a little bit. So the state owns Juniper Ridge landfill. It's a really large landfill up near Old Town. The state bought it back in 2004 as a reaction to states throughout New England strengthening their waste laws, and the state of Maine did not want Maine to be a dumping ground for New England. So the way to prevent that is to own the landfill. That way we can avoid violating the Federal Commerce Clause. We can't prevent waste from going across state lines to commercial facilities, but we can to a state-owned facility. So the state bought the landfill for this purpose. So to me, this is why this issue is particularly frustrating, is because the intent of landfill ownership was to prevent this. and it's happening at an astounding rate, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about on the next slide. Thank you, Evan. So the issue really is the volume. The landfill has increased, the disposal at that landfill has increased something like 32% faster than the state anticipated when we bought it. It's now at the point where about 30% of the waste every single year is from out of state going into that landfill. And that's equivalent of 16 40-ton tractor trailers every single day of the year. So 365 days a year, you can just picture those trucks driving through. You know, and like I said, they make one pit stop at a Maine solid waste processing facility where they get disguised as in-state waste, and then they can go on legally to the state-owned landfill. Let's see, I think you can go to the next slide, please, Evan. And this is really the last one for me now. I would like to, I'll dig in much more during the breakout session, but you know, I just wanted to put a finer point on that this arrangement is basically been created by two facilities working together, or two companies working together. So the company Casella Waste Systems runs the landfill for the state. They're contracted with the state to run the landfill. And they work together with a so-called recycling facility in Lewiston to bring this waste in from out of state and then funnel it up to our state-owned landfill. So it's people have often been asking me, why would anybody want this to happen? And the answer is that there's two companies who really like this loophole. They're profiting off of it, and they would like to keep the status quo. So that's what our opposition really is all about. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there and hand it off to Jack, and look forward to talking to you all in the breakout room. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Happy March. My name is Jack Shapiro. I'm the Climate and Clean Energy Director here at NRCM. And I'm going to talk about mainly LD 1350, sponsored by Senator Vitelli. It's a renewable energy bill, and as well as touching on Governor Mills' utility accountability bill this morning. Next slide. So to give some quick context, which many of you are probably already aware of, but we have made a lot of progress on climate and energy policy in Maine over the past 3 years. There's way too much to go into in detail, but we've set legally binding greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. We've increased our renewable energy targets to 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. And to hit those targets, bipartisan majorities in the legislature and the governor created the Maine Climate Council, which released Maine's climate action plan in December of 2020. Maine won't wait. It's a big and ambitious plan, and it includes both ways that we're going to start to tackle getting dirty fossil fuels and pollution out of our electric grid, but also cleaning up other big sources of emissions like our cars and trucks and how we heat our buildings. Next slide. So what LD 1350 will do is task the Public Utilities Commission with procuring a new round of renewable energy projects to help meet these goals. Because of the above policies and other policies we've passed, thanks to the work of many of you and our partners, we've been really successful in fostering a growing solar industry in Maine here already. And this chart is showing some of the rapid growth that we've seen with installed solar basically increasing fourfold in just the past couple of years. Next slide. But even with that growth, we're going to need a lot more to hit our targets. This chart with tiny letters is from the governor's energy office earlier this year. And the blue area shows the remaining gap that we still need to fill to meet our renewable energy goals that are laid down in law. LD 1350 is one of the ways that we're going to fill that gap by bringing new solar onto the grid. And now some of you may also be aware of a bill passed last year that asked the PUC to accept bids for transmission and renewable energy projects up in Aroostook County. Now there's a ton of renewable energy potential, especially wind in northern Maine. And so, although we haven't seen the amendment to this bill yet, we understand that amendment adjusts the timing in this bill to see if those big wind projects and the associated transmission will come online through the process open at the PUC right now. These are both ways that we're going to hit these renewable energy goals, which of course is important. And you can go to the next slide, Abin. But just a quick reminder of why we have all these goals in the first place. Renewable energy, including what 1350 will bring online, is really important to grow our supply of affordable, stable, and reliable clean energy. We've seen all this winter that fossil fuels are subject to supply shortages. They're subject to the global market, and that results in price volatility, which is really, really harmful to Maine people's budgets, especially low-income folks on fixed incomes. Renewables do not rely on fuel at all. They are long-term contracted at stable prices, and they help keep those prices stable for Maine families. And LD 1350 uses the same competitive bidding process that's worked over and over in the past number of years to bring more low-cost wind and solar onto the grid. These projects also can be hugely beneficial for local communities. The last round of procurements like this is estimated to bring the host communities for these projects nearly $9 million a year in tax revenues for schools, water and sewer systems, filling potholes, all those key local infrastructure needs that we have. It also means jobs and cutting down on the billions of dollars that flow out of our state to pay for fossil fuels. And the third thing, of course, is climate change. I don't have to tell this group about the seriousness of climate impacts, which are already here now. Clean energy really is the backbone of our climate action plan, giving us both the energy we need to get fossil fuels out of our electricity supply, but also give us the clean power we need for to transition our transportation and building sectors as well. It's really the critical path. Next slide, Adam. So the other bill to talk about this morning is LD 1959. It was introduced a few weeks ago by the governor to meet a simple goal. Really, our utilities, as everyone here knows, are not providing Maine people what they deserve. And this bill sets out clear goals, and that if the utilities don't meet them, they will be penalized or replaced. We think the impetus behind this bill is a good one, but it really needs to be strengthened in several key ways to achieve its goals and help move the ball forward on climate and towards the power system we really need. So first, the bill includes an important set of key performance metrics that utilities need to hit. And we need to broaden those metrics. Right now, they're focused on reliable service, accurate bills, some good customer service, sort of core things, and that's very important. But utilities also need to be accountable for affordability and for how they're aligning their businesses to meet the climate goals we've put into law as a state. The second piece that really needs improvement is climate planning. The bill right now requires utilities to plan for the impacts of climate change and sort of protect their own infrastructure, their substations, things like that. But it has no provision to require proactive planning for how they mean to enable the clean energy transition here in Maine. And we think this is a big oversight and something that we really need to see included in the bill. But if we do, it's going to make it far, far easier for utilities, the PUC, Efficiency Maine, and others to make this transition at the lowest cost with the biggest benefit for Maine people. The last big piece is about divestiture and the consumer-owned utility. This bill includes a provision that if a utility is failing on their metrics, the PUC can revoke their ability to operate in Maine. And it provides an option for a committee to offer a consumer-owned utility option to take over instead of just sort of selling the utility to another private owner. Unfortunately, the specifics of that provision aren't very strong. And because of that, it's been interpreted as a way to undermine the ongoing work to put a consumer-owned utility proposal on the ballot in 23. We believe really strongly that this bill should not be seen as in conflict with the consumer-owned utility referendum, because we're going to need performance metrics and climate planning and effective oversight for a consumer-owned utility as well. So we are working right now with partners and legislators to make some of those changes, as well as on the planning and metrics piece. And we really think there's a lot of potential in a strengthened bill. So lots more to come, and please stay tuned there, and happy to talk more about that in the breakouts. That's all I have. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Nick.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Nick Bennett. I'm the staff scientist for NRCM. And I want to talk to you about two bills that we are working on in the legislature related to water. The first bill is LD 1979, which is a bad bill that would cripple the ability of Maine state resource agencies to weigh in on the relicensing process for FERC hydropower dams. If this bill passes, it will stop anything like the Edwards Dam removal or the Penobscot River Restoration Project from happening again. Next slide. So there are 4 dams on the Kennebec River between Waterville and Skowhegan. And the owner of these dams is Brookfield, a massive global energy company, and they are the key force behind this bill. They have proposed totally inadequate fish passage measures for these dams. And one of them, the Shawmut Dam, the 3rd dam up on the river, is in the process of undergoing a very complex federal relicensing project. And as they are supposed to do, Maine's agencies called Brookfield on its inadequate plan to provide fish passage at the Shawmut Dam and issued a draft denial for a key part of that licensing process that the state has to sign off on. And that's really what resulted in this bill. Brookfield didn't like the fact that it couldn't get around the rules to provide good fish passage. So what it's trying to do with LD 1979 is change those rules and prevent the state from protecting the resources that belong to Maine people, namely the fish and waters in Maine rivers. Next slide. And this is particularly important for the fate of Atlantic salmon, because what you're looking at now is a picture of the Sandy River. And the Sandy River is the biggest chunk of really high quality salmon habitat in Maine, and salmon spawning and rearing habitat. And right now, those 4 dams block Atlantic salmon on their upstream migration and on their downstream migrations from the Sandy to the ocean. The Sandy River comes into the Kennebec above Skowhegan. And so the Atlantic salmon run in the Kennebec was probably the largest in the United States prior to our destruction of our rivers, and numbered in the hundreds of thousands of fish. We're now down to about 30. And all of the fish that make it to the Sandy are trapped at the first dam on the river because it doesn't have functional fish passage, and taken up to that river by truck. And approximately half of the juvenile salmon trying to swim down from the Sandy after they're hatched and get out to the ocean are killed at Brookfield's 4 dams. So we really need to stop this bill, because the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has shown every willingness to do exactly what Brookfield wants. And what has stood in the way is Maine state resources agencies calling them on providing real fish passage instead of the inadequate measures that they proposed. Next slide. So our rivers used to teem with sea run fish. These are alewives. And in order to restore Atlantic salmon, we need to restore all the native species of sea-run fish, because Atlantic salmon are naturally less common than these other species. If you have a restoration program focused on salmon alone, it's doomed from the start because predators will just eat the salmon. So the Atlantic salmon need thriving rivers filled with these other species as well. And Brookfield's proposed fish passage at these 4 dams won't work for these species either. Next slide. We know what happens when you provide good fish passage and you remove dams. Fish come back, and they come back in a hurry. Since 2008, which is when the Fort Halifax Dam came out at the mouth of the Sebasticook River in Winslow, more than 40 million alewives have reached their spawning habitat in the Kennebec watershed. And you can see at the left of this graph how quickly the fish responded to the removal of the Edwards Dam and the Fort Halifax Dam. We know that dam removals work in Maine. They've been huge successes on both the Kennebec and the Penobscot. We want to see that happen further upstream on the Kennebec, and Brookfield's 4 dams provide a trivial amount of power. They're small, they're not productive. The balance between the renewable energy they provide and the damage they cause to sea-run fish is totally out of balance. And we need to do something about these 4 dams and bring the Kennebec back to life. Next slide. So another bill that we're working on is a much more positive bill. I think it will have an easier time. We'll have an easier time getting this bill through the legislature than we will killing the previous bill. The previous bill has a very powerful sponsor, which is Senate President Troy Jackson. And he is pushing hard to pass that bill. So it's going to be a lot of work for us to defeat it. LD 1964, which is a bill that will upgrade water quality protections for 800 miles of rivers and streams in Maine, has a lot less significant opposition. And there's a lot of good news in that bill, and legislators generally like good news. The bill would increase protections for these streams by upgrading their water quality classifications. Yesterday we had the hearing on both of these bills. This bill received a lot of support, so we're not so worried about whether or not this bill will pass. We think it will move forward. Next slide, please. And this bill is an especially fitting tribute because this year, 2022, is the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, which Maine's own Senator Ed Muskie drafted in 1972. And the roots of this upgrade procedure, which is called a triennial review and is a requirement of federal law, had to have their origin in Ed Muskie's Clean Water Act. The triennial review happens every 3 years. DEP has to review the state's waters and its water quality standards and propose upgrades and protections where appropriate. That's what they're doing this year. This is a good package of recommendations, and it's a fitting tribute to Ed Muskie to pass it this year. Next slide. I think that's the end of my slides. So looks like we're going to move on to questions.
Yep. So Abin, if you want to pull down your screen, we'll have about 10 minutes for questions before we jump into the breakout rooms. Again, the breakout rooms are a chance to dive a little bit deeper on these bills and ask questions directly of our program leaders. But any questions before we jump into breakout rooms? And you're welcome to take yourself right off mute and ask it verbally. You're also welcome to type it in the chat if you'd like. But if anybody has a question, feel free to come off mute and ask away.
Hi, Todd, this is Linda Stathopoulos. I'm wondering what the alternative bill that Governor Mills is vetoing, LD 1626, the Wabanaki sovereignty. The speaker had mentioned that the expectation is Governor Mills will veto it in favor of a different bill. What's that other bill?
Sure, that's a great question, Linda. Thanks, and I'll turn it over to Melanie, who's point for tribal sovereignty on our staff.
Yeah, the bill number is LD 585, and I could tell you more about it if you'd like to join the breakout group. Just want to be sensitive to our time.
Stephen, go right ahead.
Nick, two questions. Number one, what's Janet Mills' take on 1979? And could you briefly explain why Troy Jackson is a sponsor or supporting it?
Sure. The administration is strongly opposed to LD 1979 because Department of Marine Resources and Department of Environmental Protection have been very supportive of fisheries restoration efforts on the Kennebec. Why is Troy Jackson supporting this? That's a really good question. I think he sees this as a way to, I don't really want to guess at motives. I think he's carrying Brookfield's water on this. Brookfield wants to change the rules. Troy Jackson testified that, we need to have the Shawmut Dam because the Sappi Mill needs the Shawmut Dam, and we have to do everything we can to protect pulp and paper mill jobs. I don't think that there's a logical connection there. The process going on around the Shawmut Dam does not have to result in the removal of that dam. A, and B, if the Shawmut Dam were removed, we don't think it would happen in a way that's a threat to Sappi. So I can't honestly say why the Senate president is as exercised over this issue as he is. We've talked to him quite a number of times and tried to explain to him that this bill isn't necessary, and he has, and that we would not support a dam removal if it did threaten the Sappi Mill. We don't think it would, but if it did, we wouldn't support it. And none of that's worked. He's proceeded forward with the bill.
Great, thank you, Nick. Thank you. Bonnie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question for Sarah Nichols regarding LD 1639. Which you mentioned the fact that Juniper Ridge is close to Old Town, but which specific communities in that area are affected, number one, by all the increased truck traffic that you talked about, as well as water quality because of Juniper Ridge?
Sure. So it's in Old Town. It actually straddles Old Town Argyle town line. So I should say both of those actually. I know I could picture the exit that the trucks get off of, but it's right near Orono, right near UMO, driving up that direction. And one of, there's a coalition of impacted residents make up this group called Don't Waste Maine. I think their website is down this morning, but hopefully it will back up today. I would encourage people to check them out. And there's representatives on that group from the Penobscot Nation. The tribe is particularly concerned with this landfill. All landfills create leachate needing treatment, and this, all the leachate leaving Juniper Ridge goes up to the wastewater treatment plant at the old paper mill and gets ultimately treated and discharged into the river, and that's just north of where it's where they that's where they fish, and that's the water they drink and the air they breathe. So yeah, anybody who lives near the landfill is really concerned, and they smell that rotten egg smells hydrogen sulfide gas, and that's created by this construction demolition debris with this gypsum wallboard that's coming in from Massachusetts. So it's really all compounding for them.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Any other questions before we jump into our breakout rooms?
I just have a quick question. Do we have any dates about when these bills are coming forward? I missed the very beginning of the program, so if you talked about it then, I can watch this later. But
sure. Yeah, so the quick answer is that each of these bills that we just covered have already had a public hearing. They're all in different phases of the legislature. Some have received a vote in the House. Others are awaiting a vote in the House and the Senate. But this is sort of a really important time for the fate of these bills. So the short answer is they're sort of at different phases of the legislative process, but now is a great time to influence how lawmakers will vote on these bills because they'll be decided in the next couple of weeks.
And is this a good time to be calling them at this
Yeah.
point about these bills? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what we're hoping that you'll do after
Okay.
you learn about these bills today. We're hoping that you'll call your state representative and state senator and encourage them to support these bills and oppose, of course, the bad Kennebec bill, and ask them how they'll vote. And then we'd like to hear about your conversation with them on a quick survey that I'll share online.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So why don't we go ahead and jump into our breakout rooms. Again, this is about 20 minutes to ask questions of our program directors about these bills and learn a little bit more about these bills in greater detail. So I'm going to go ahead and open the breakout rooms. They will end after 20 minutes, and then we'll return here to the main session where we'll hear about a few other bills and issues happening outside of the legislature from Pete Didisheim, our advocacy director. Hi, everyone. Welcome back from your breakout rooms. We hope that you learned a little bit more about the bills you were most interested in and got some of your questions answered. We're just going to give it another couple seconds here to let other folks come back from their breakout room. And then we're going to hear from Pete Didisheim, NRCM's advocacy director, about a few other bills making their way through the legislature and a couple of environmental issues happening outside of the legislative arena. So Abin, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, and we'll turn it over to Pete.
Greetings, everybody, and thank you again for participating in this annual Citizen Action Day. So just as a reminder, we're in the 130th legislature. This is a 2-year legislature. Last year's session, the long session, was longer, slower, with a lot more bills. About 1,700 bills were being considered. This is the so-called emergency session. It's the shorter, faster session with fewer bills, about 350 bills totally under consideration. And we're tracking about 30 bills this year. Last year, we were tracking closer to 200. But because things are moving quickly, it's pretty rapid pace of everything that we're paying attention to. So, for example, the bills that Nick was talking about on the dam bill and the river reclassification bill, those were in a public hearing all day yesterday, and they will be in a work session tomorrow. It's that fast. So we're keeping up with a lot of bills. Why don't we move to the next slide, Evan? I'm just going to talk about 4 bills that we're also paying attention to. In the upper left-hand corner, there's a number of electric vehicles lined up. There's a bill Senator Vitelli has introduced, LD 1579. This bill is aimed at greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles. Transportation provides 54% of the state's greenhouse gas emissions. This bill is in a work session right now, this morning. The bill has been amended from its original version. The original version set a goal of 100% zero emission vehicles by the state, county, and local governments by 2040. It's been amended so that now at the state level, the Central Fleet Management and Department of Public Safety by the year 2025 are to increase the purchase of plug-in hybrids and zero emission vehicles, the new vehicles acquired each year, to 50% of acquisitions by 2025 and 100% by 2030. The Department of Education has a goal in this bill of by 2035, at least 75% of new school buses would be zero emission vehicles, and county and municipal governments shall, to the extent practicable, meet a goal of by 2035 of increasing new vehicles to 100% plug-ins and zero emission vehicles, again, by 2035. So that, to the extent practicable, is means that within their budgets. So this bill, we hope, will move forward. Moving to the upper right-hand corner, the Maine Climate Core. This bill was in public hearing yesterday, and we testified in support of this bill. It's LD 1979, introduced by Representative Morgan Riley. The bill would create a Maine Climate Corps program under the Maine Commission for Community Service. This is following the recommendations both of the Maine Climate Action Plan and of a report that was done by Volunteer Maine that was completed late last year, reported to the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. It involved about 100 stakeholders. This bill would provide $1.2 million to create a climate corps. That would be state funding. It would also be a program that could accept federal funding. And the program would be like AmeriCorps, which places people with schools and nonprofits and public service entities. This climate corps would focus particularly the work of the members of the corps in 11 project areas that deal with climate. So community resilience planning, energy education and outreach, healthy soils and regenerative agriculture, ocean acidification monitoring, green schools, local food programs, community solar projects, lots of really good and necessary areas for involvement dealing with climate adaptation and mitigation. The lower right-hand corner, Climate Literacy Now, is intended to refer to a bill, LD 1902, that was introduced by Representative Lydia Bloom. This bill, and she's from York, Maine, this bill would significantly expand science-based climate education in the state. The bill would provide $3 million in grant funding for climate education, and it's been amended so that the program could include private funding as well. This bill has passed the House. It just recently passed the House last week, and it'll be in the Senate next week. And an interesting component of this bill is that the grant funding needs to be prioritized for schools and communities that have been historically underserved by climate science education, including the tribal nations, schools with high populations of students who receive free and reduced price lunches, rural, remote schools, classrooms at schools of color, English language learner students. So that bill has some momentum, but because it's a big price tag, $3 million, it's going to require a good bit of effort to get that funded when it gets to the Appropriations Committee. And then the lower left-hand corner is an image that refers to a bill introduced by Representative Bill Pluker. He's an independent from the town of Warren. It's a bill, LD 1911. This bill would close 2 loopholes in Maine law that are allowing the continued application on Maine land of materials that are contaminated with PFAS, the so-called forever chemicals. And these chemicals, which pose significant health risks, particularly to children and pregnant women, have contaminated a number of family farms and hundreds of residential wells in Maine. I think many people have read about the PFAS problem. This bill would prohibit the spreading of compost that is contaminated with PFAS, or the mixing of PFAS contaminated municipal or industrial sludge with non-contaminated soils. That bill is still in work session, and it's probably going to be amended a considerable amount. So let's move to the next slide. So issues beyond the State House, there's a lot that's happening outside of the legislature, and NRCM keeps track of both things happening at the State House and at the agencies. Next slide. And this is a big year for implementation of laws that were enacted in prior years. So 2019 and 2021 were 2 of the most successful legislative sessions we have ever experienced on environmental matters. More than 50 bills were enacted that we were involved in helping pass in those 2 legislative sessions. And it's not enough just to pass new laws. We also have to make sure that they're implemented well. So every one of these boxes represents laws that have been put into place that we're working with the agencies, with our colleagues in other environmental organizations and other coalition partners. I'll just mention a few of them across the top line. We passed a first of the nation extended producer responsibility law for packaging waste. That's going to be going through a rulemaking process over the next year and a half. Really important to get those rules right. The Land for Maine's Future program just got $50 million, and we're tracking very closely the expenditure of those funds. Last year, we passed federal funding for water projects, State parks got $50 million. Energy efficiency programs got about $50 million, particularly for low-income households. We're keeping track of that. The Department of Environmental Protection and other agencies are developing updated rules. We'll be going through rulemaking to make sure that our rules and regulations conform with the science-based projections of sea level rise that were put into law last year. So a number of other boxes here that all represent programs that have been started or increased funding level that's been made available. The lower right-hand corner, community resilience and climate mitigation. This is an important area where the state, the governor has announced this new community resilience partnership program. It has $4.75 million in grant funding to be made available to municipalities and tribal governments to start or improve climate action plans. And at the town level, there's these community action grants that are available the current grant window closes on March 22nd. So if you're interested in getting your community to be more involved in climate planning, I encourage you to do a Google search for Community Resilience Partnership in Maine, and there's a video you can watch and more information about how to get your community involved. Next slide. Then we just walk through a couple of updates that might also be of interest. The Central Maine Corridor that's been so controversial. Just a review of where things are at. The referendum passed in November with 60% of the Maine voters rejecting the CMP corridor. Avangrid, CMP's parent, immediately sued the state to try to overturn the results of the elections, and they immediately continued and accelerated cutting in the 53-mile corridor in Western Maine. We requested a preliminary injunction at the courts to force them to stop construction on the project while the case is pending against the state. And we called on the DEP to suspend the permit. The DEP did decide in late November to suspend the permit, and the court, Judge Duddy, did grant the injunction in middle of December. So the referendum was put into place on December 19th, and now it's in the courts. The decision, the oral argument will be heard on May 9th and 10th of Avangrid versus the state of Maine is basically what that case is about. The decision will be made in middle of the summer. So it's many more months before, while CMP absolutely cannot do any further work on this project, there's also a case dealing with the illegal lease of the Bureau of Parks and Lands issued an illegal lease to CMP to cross public lands without getting 2/3 approval of the House and Senate. We think a hearing on that case will be in March. With a ruling this spring, the Board of Environment, we've also appealed a permit that the DEP granted, and that appeal is pending before the Board of Environmental Protection. And NRCM, Appalachian Mountain Club, and Sierra Club all appealed in March 2021 the Army Corps of Engineers permit. So there's multiple legal actions and appeals that still stand in the way of CMP, and we hope to prevail through one or all of these cases to keep this project from being restarted. And next and final slide. I just also wanted to mention another project that we're concerned about. The Norwegian company, American Aquafarms, has proposed building Maine's largest ocean-based Atlantic salmon aquaculture project in Frenchman Bay. This raises a whole number of environmental and economic concerns. At full capacity, this aqua farm would produce 66 million pounds of salmon, and every day there would be 4 billion gallons of untreated effluent that would be discharged into Frenchman's Bay. And that would create a substantial increase in nitrogen, phosphorus, other chemicals into the water. So we've joined with communities, lobstermen, Friends of Acadia, Bar Harbor, Chamber of Commerce, the National Park Service of Acadia to oppose this project. There's a pretty substantial coalition, and we just think it's too risky the technology that has been proposed would be unprecedented for use at this scale. And wouldn't, and even though it's a Norwegian company, and Norway obviously is the largest producer of salmon around the world, this scale would not even be allowed in Norway. So we're following the permits on this. There's 2 60-acre semi-closed pens that would be involved, and none of the communities in the area want this project to move forward. So we're working to stop this. And I think that's the last slide I had. Yes. So as you can see in the State House and beyond, we are very active. Thanks for your involvement and support in all that we do. Back to you, Todd.
Thanks, Pete. Abin, you can pull the slides down. Great. Well, we are coming to the end of our time together this morning here, but just a couple of quick reminders. So in a typical year, if we were all together in person at NRCM's office, we would be walking over to the State House together right now to find our lawmakers in the bustling halls of the State House. Of course, we can't do that this year because of the pandemic. So what we're hoping that you do as soon as possible, because these bills and these talking points are fresh in your minds, is to call your state representative and senator this week, so that you can encourage them to vote in support of the bills that you just learned about this morning. If you don't know who your state representative or senator are, you can find out who they are and their contact information. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat if I can. You can find your state representative and senator at that link that I just shared in the chat, and find their phone number. And after you have a conversation with them and learn how they plan to vote on the bills that you heard about this morning, we also hope that you'll share notes from that conversation with a quick survey, which I also just dropped into the chat. And tomorrow you'll receive a follow-up email from me with both of these links that I just shared to look up your lawmakers and this survey. I'll also include our fact sheets on these bills that you learned about, which also have lots of talking points that you can use for those conversations with your lawmakers. And that's our program for this morning. We really appreciate all of you for joining us here online today. We'd love to be in person. I'm sure we'll get together for in-person events soon. But until then, stay warm, enjoy the last couple of weeks of winter, get outside and play. And you can, of course, follow NRCM's work at the legislature on our website. Our legislative bill tracking page is a great place to track our top priority bills, our fact sheets, our testimony, when key moments are coming up on the fate of these bills. So thanks again for all of your support of our work here at NRCM, and we'll see you all again soon. Bye. Have a good morning.